Hey everyone, it's Alexi Uzas here from Exile Accelerator. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about finance as it relates to both film and TV, and I'm going to explain to you why it's easier to finance films and why you should opt for financing a film over a TV series. Now, before I get started, I want to let you know that spots are available for our Producing Accelerator program that helps filmmakers like you consistently finance, produce, and distribute your own films so that you can start to build a career in the film industry. So if that's something that you're interested in, stick around until the end of this video, and I'm going to give you some more information about that program. In the meantime, for the best filmmaking advice, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to be notified when we post a video. Okay, so before we dive in, I do want to start by giving some context around how film is financed and how TV is financed. So when it comes to financing films, there are really a couple of ways that can happen. The first is that you sell your script to a major studio or a mini major, and of course now that includes streaming platforms. Now in that case, those companies are going to finance, produce, and distribute the film. So you don't really need to worry about the financing stage. All you've got to do is negotiate so that you stay on the project, either as a director or as a producer. Of course, if you're just a writer and that's all you want to be, then that's fine as well. And once you have done that, then it's really just about showing up and executing the creative, because they take care of everything else. The second way to finance your film is to independently finance your film. And that's really when it's up to you to get the film financed and into production. And the typical sources of finance for that are private equity, distribution advances, tax rebates, gap financing, and soft money. So those are the elements of finance that are available to you. And within that, there's really three ways that a film can get financed. A combination of all of those things that I mentioned, a combination of some of those things, or only private equity. So that's really how a film gets financed. Now let's talk about TV. So the way that TV gets typically financed is similar to how the first option I gave you with film is finance. So it's where you take a project to a broadcaster in this case, or a streaming platform, and you pitch them that project, and they come on board as either the sole financier or the major financier. If they're the sole financier, then of course you don't really have to worry about any of the finance, so you can just go along for the ride. If they're the major financier, you may need to bring in some other elements of finance that I spoke about. And with TV, that's really going to be tax rebates, soft money, and potentially distribution advances. Now, just to elaborate what I mean by distribution advances, if you get a broadcaster attached in your domestic country, so let's say you're producing a series in Australia and you get a major broadcaster on board as a majority financier. And in that case, let's say that they haven't taken the international rights, they only want the Australian rights. Well, in that case, you can actually go and sell the international rights to either a sales agent or to distributors or other broadcasters in different countries. So in that case, distribution advances can come into the financing of your series. So that's how film finance works, and that's how TV finance works. Now I'm going to tell you why film financing is that much easier. The first reason is that you can raise private investment to finance part of or all of your film, whereas you can't do that with TV. Now, this is something that not everyone realizes, not every filmmaker realizes this, but if you're going to try and finance a pilot for a TV series or an entire series, even an online series, so online or TV, then you need to think about what's in it for the private investor. How are you going to generate a return for the private investor? The reason this is tricky for TV is because of the elements of finance that are available for both of those formats and the way that they're financed that I just described about. So with TV, what typically happens is that streaming platform or that broadcaster just comes up and finances that film, that series. And this makes it extremely difficult for you to show an investor how they're going to generate a return. Because when a broadcaster or a streaming platform is financing a series, if they're just paying for the whole thing, then there's no return in there for the investor. They're just paying for the hard costs of actually making it, and they're taking the rights. Well, what happens in a case where they're only partly funding it? Let's say that they're majority funding it, and so you need to find that gap. Well, again, if they're taking all the rights around the world, then even if there is a gap, it's irrelevant because there's going to be no other way to generate ongoing returns and royalties. Now, you might say, well, what if you retain the international rights? Well, in that case, then yes, there is an opportunity for investors to come on board. But what makes it very difficult to get them on board is that there's no data out there around the sale of TV shows. So this is really the clincher. And this is essentially the reason why it's so much easier to raise finance for film, because there's a proven way to generate a return for investors, which means that you can actually raise private investment. So going back for a second, the issue with TV is that there's no publicly available data out there that tells you how much of a series was sold for to different territories, and or how much reruns were sold for. And the reason is that those are B2B sales, so they're business to business sales. So there's no consumer data out there. Whereas with film, it's extremely easy to find data, historic data around the performance of films. So anyone can go and search for box office data. And you can even find some home entertainment data. And what this allows you to do is allows you to create financial models for your project based on historical data from similar projects. And that then allows you to create projections. And with those projections, you can demonstrate with some level of confidence what a film can potentially return to an investor. So this is why film is so much preferable when it comes to independent financing. It's because you can raise private investment, and the reason that you can raise private investment is because you have the data that allows you to create the models that allows you to pitch to private investors. Following on from that, the second reason is that your funding options are limitless. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to raise private investment for your film, which really every film that's financed independently requires some level of private investment, then the potential individuals that you can reach out to is limitless, right? There's a limit in terms of the population of the world, but there's really that number is so high that the potential that you have to raise private investment is so large that it makes it so preferable as opposed to TV. Because with TV, the number of potential companies that you can pitch to finance your project is limited. It's extremely finite and it's extremely small. So even if you're in America, which would have the largest amount of broadcasters, networks, streaming platforms, even if you're there, the number of those companies is limited. So if you can't get your film picked up by one of those companies, then it's impossible for you to finance that project. And if you're not in America, if you're in another country, then your options are likely even more limited. Whereas when it comes to film, again, the amount of individuals there are in the world means that the potential investors for your film is huge as opposed to TV series. So this is another really important reason why film financing is so much easier, because your options are limitless. The next reason is that there are no gatekeepers when it comes to independent film financing. So when you're pitching to a TV series or an online series to a broadcaster or a streaming platform or a network, those are gatekeepers. You're essentially at their mercy. They either like your project or they don't. Or worse still, you can't even get into a room with them because you don't have the network, you don't have any relationship with them, you can't get in the door. So these are the gatekeepers of that industry. And if you are not in with those gatekeepers, it can be extremely difficult for you to even get a seat at the table. Another reason why this is a real problem is that if they just don't like your project creatively, then again, your options are so limited. So if you go and pitch it to all these different companies and they all say no, then you don't really have another option from there. Whereas with film, again, going back to raising private investment, those are not gatekeepers. You can get in front of any number of private investors that you want and pitch to them. And even if you need to bring, say your finance requires a higher level of finance, so you can't just raise private investment. Well, with tax rebates, they're not gatekeepers, because as long as you tick certain boxes that aren't related to the creative, then you're going to be eligible for a tax credit. With distributors and sales agents, those are gatekeepers, but you don't need them on board if you have access to tax rebates and private investment. So again, with film, yes, there are gatekeepers in that industry, but if you can't get through those gatekeepers, then you have a backup plan. Another issue is that even if you're pitching a TV series or an online series and they like the creative, if you haven't made TV before, then it's extremely difficult for those platforms or those broadcasters to team up with you. And when I say extremely difficult, what I mean is there's a higher risk on their part. Because the budget that you're going to be responsible is quite high for a series, they're likely going to want to either have an established relationship with you so that they know what you're like and they know that they can trust you with the project, or they're going to want to know that you have the resources, that you have the knowledge and the experience to actually execute what you're saying that you will execute. So the gatekeepers is a real issue. The first issue is just getting into a room with them. The second is even when you're in the room with them, you got to convince them creatively. And then thirdly, even if you convince them creatively, you then need to convince them that you can actually execute at a production level on what you're saying you can execute. Okay, and the fourth and final reason why financing a film is easier than TV is that it's just cheaper. So it is extremely expensive to finance and produce a TV series, whereas financing and producing a low budget or micro budget or even low to mid level film is much cheaper. So by virtue of it being cheaper, it is just easier to finance because there's less finance to have to raise. And when it comes to raising private equity or even just raising finance for a project, the lower the budget, the easier it is most of the time. There are obviously exceptions to that rule, but typically, the lower the amount that you're trying to raise, the easier it is. And this is a really important consideration. And it's extremely important as well if you're just starting out as a filmmaker, as a producer, as a writer, director, because it is difficult to raise private investment for a film. So the lower that can be, the easier it's going to be to raise it. On the TV side, if you're trying to raise private investment for, let's say, a pilot episode, not only is it, can you not demonstrate to the investor what the return's going to be? So I can't really think of how you would then pitch that to an investor. I mean, that would have to be absolutely crazy. But even if you did get them on, the amount that you're going to spend on a pilot, like if you make a 60-minute pilot, like you're pretty much at the range of making a feature film. But you only made one episode out of a whole series. So this is why with film, it's so much easier to finance, and I think it's preferable, especially when you're starting out, because even if you're able to finance a pilot, all you have is a pilot. Whereas if you finance a film, you have the end product, you have the final product. And so you can get that out there into the world. Whereas even if you go and finance a pilot, you're still left with just a pilot, and you have to try and raise the finance for a series. So you're not going through the process of, financing a film, producing it, and getting it out there into the world. And I think that that's really important to do, especially in the early stages of your career. It is really about creating, and it's about getting audience to see the work that you've created, and then learning from that experience, and then moving on to the next project. Okay, so that's it for this video. I do hope you found it useful and informative. I hope it also answers a lot of questions that you have around TV financing as much as film financing. So, if you're working on a TV project right now, TV series or a pilot, and you're just not sure how the hell you're going to finance it, I mean, it's okay, because, the pathway to financing TV is almost non-existent at the independent level. So if you did like this video, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, jump into the comments and let me know about any of the other reasons why you think financing films is easier than TV. And also let me know about whether you're working on any of those types of projects right now. I do want to tell you about our Producing Accelerator program that helps you consistently finance, produce, and distribute your own films. Now, it's obvious that I am running that program because I make films, I produce films. But one of the reasons that I started producing films and didn't turn to TV and still haven't turned to TV is because of the way that it's financed. And because I truly believe that independently financing films, it is much easier than TV, and it allows you to retain much more control both creatively and over your career. So if you're interested in learning how to finance and produce and distribute your own films, then you want to head to the link in the description, and you can set up a time to speak with either me or a member of my team, and we'll be dissecting your project, working out where you're at right now, where you're trying to get to, and if the accelerator is the right fit for you. And as always, check out these videos next on how to up your filmmaking game.